Welcome to today's episode. I am Thaddeus,
And I'm Jeremiah.
and today we're joined with our special guest, Joe Julian. He's a pastor at our church, City Light. Joe, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Hey guys,
thanks.
how's it going?
It's going great.
I'm doing good.
Good.
Sure, yeah. So today we have Joe on to help discuss the topic of God's covenant and promises. One, throughout the Bible, and two, how do we discern them today in our own lives? And so we have Joe here to
To discuss this light and airy topic, just
Yeah,
really easy.
It wouldn't be
a
the
very
dense muffin
simple-
without a dense topic. So,
Yes, I like that. Yeah.
so yeah, I guess we can jump right into Joe. You want to give a little bit of background on like who you are and
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, having me on. It's gonna be fun just hanging out, talk with you guys a little bit. And I actually do. I love the covenants of God, so I'm actually very excited about this topic. But so yeah, maybe introduce myself. I guess I am a pastor at City Light Omaha, specifically Midtown, the campus pastor at the Midtown location. I've been a pastor since 2015, so that's 9 years. Right at 9 years, because I think I started in April back then. So yeah, I'm married to my wife Whitney. It'll be 20 years on May 8th.
congratulations.
Thank you. And we've got 3 kids. Waverly, who is, by the end of this summer, she'll be 15. Lydia will be 13, and then Elliot will be 11. So, yeah, that's
Great.
a little bit about me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is the topic on covenants so important to you?
You know, I think we learn a lot about the character of God through his covenants, because his covenants are in many ways how he has interacted with his people, made promises, followed through on them. But we also learn a lot about how humans were created, the purpose for which they were created, and how we can interact with and work alongside God in the work that he is doing on this earth. And since he created this earth, I think it's fairly important for us to try to figure out what it is he's actually doing, why he created this earth, why he created us, and our role in creation. So I think you learn a lot of that through the covenants, plus also, like I said, just the character of God, his steadfast love, and the consistency in which he has been faithful to his covenants. That can also give us confidence today and moving forward into the culmination and consummation, if you will, of all of his covenants. So
Yeah.
Beforehand, what was your understanding of covenants, Jeremiah?
Yeah, I think growing up in church, you kind of get the sense that covenants were meant for either the founding fathers of Israel or the founding fathers of the church. You kind of get this idea of there's this, you have to hear this voice from God, and you have to have, with Abraham, Abraham heard from God audibly, and he
Right.
talked to God, and you have Jacob, and a lot of those founding fathers of Israel, and they have this audible experience where they're talking with God, and they get this promise, and God tells them, I'm going to do this. And then you can see throughout their lives how he works circumstances to he works circumstances throughout their lives to make those come to fruition. And so it kind of feels, almost like cessationist in a way, where that was great. He did that for the people, so that way he could lay the foundation, lay the footwork, the groundwork for the church today as it is now, and the coming of Jesus Christ. But now it's we're living in the new covenant, the New Testament, and that's all we need. And he doesn't make promises to us individually in our lives, which obviously we're gonna see is not true. But I feel that's kind of where I came at it for the first time. Is it just feels again, it's stuff that you see in the Bible, but you don't see anymore, because it just feels harder to discern, and a little bit more rare, I guess. And
It feels kind of irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
To like just our daily walk, right? If that's kind of how we view these covenants, like, okay, that's great and that's wonderful from a historical standpoint, but
Right.
why does that matter, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
I'm
you, Thad?
kind of in the same boat. Growing up in church, it was just like covenants were some things that happened in the Old Testament, and then I think it wasn't until I actually even though I grew up in the church, didn't become a Christian until I was 17. Finding out through the gospel that we are in a new covenant with God through Jesus Christ. So beforehand, I only thought that covenants were. I mean, they are in a way. They are an agreement between God and His people.
Yep.
And but it is. I agree wholeheartedly with Jeremiah. Is things that happened in the Old Testament don't happen now, and the new covenant is just the gospel, and that's all I knew.
Sure.
So
I feel like we can paint with a broad brush, especially with a lot of topics. It's that stuff happened then, but doesn't happen now, and that's kind of like a cessationist view. I think I said that before, and it's just it's where in the Bible does it say that all those things stopped? It doesn't say that. So where do we get those ideas? I wonder.
It's a little similar to spiritual gifts in the Bible. Even people in general today, some people don't believe that the spiritual gift of prophecy is still out there.
Right.
Or any spiritual gift is still irrelevant, or still relevant to today, except for certain cherry-picked ones, But there's nothing that says that they stopped.
Right.
So covenant's the same way.
What was your initial view of covenants, Joe?
That's a great question. So probably the first time I heard covenant was a neighborhood covenant. So not even a biblical understanding of the word. And then I think, I'd hear about marriage covenants and different things like that. So I think my initial idea of a covenant really probably matched like a godly contract. I wouldn't have really ever seen it as a way to see the character of God, who He is, how we relate to Him, right? Which I think is one of the big things that we now learn from covenants. More probably just taking my cues from worldly definitions and things like that. So yeah. I mean, I didn't even know who Abraham was until I was a Christian for a couple years. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So my background's maybe a little bit different than you guys, and I didn't have all of the biblical stories impressed on me. I mean, I knew who Moses was and Noah and Adam, but the intricacies of how they all fit together, I didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that it's kind of random, but I guess you were talking about the first instance of covenant. The word covenant that you heard was the marriage covenant or just a neighborhood covenant.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the first time when I was younger. I think you know what I'm talking. It's about Halo.
Yes, I was thinking
because the evil, the aliens, are called the Covenant.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so
you know what? A funny side note is that someone can interpret the Halo franchise as a battle between religiosity and atheism. Humanity being the atheists and the Covenant being religious.
Huh.
And yeah.
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
Anyway, I could see that.
That's
but
completely off
topic. It's just how I am. Sometimes serious things, I just have to cut it with something.
A little bunny trail.
Bunny trail.
Yeah, bunny trails.
Nice little fluffy little bunny trail.
You're right.
Yeah. We could jump right into the Old Testament covenants. In brief, what are they? I think we listed 5 of them. Now we have the Adamic, but also I've heard it called the Edenic, which is Eden.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. What would you say that, Joe, that is?
Yeah. So the Adamic covenant, there's actually there's some disagreement on whether that's an actual covenant or not.
Because I had never heard that.
Yeah. So do you think that it's a covenant? And yeah, there's all different kinds of reasons why people maybe see that as a covenant or not. I think a lot of it comes down to just semantics and different things like that. But essentially, what you see in God's covenant with Adam, or the Eden covenant, like you said, is God gives Adam and Eve this mandate, this cultural mandate, to go be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And then obviously he gives them a rule, right? The one rule: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so they turn and they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, predictably, and sin enters the world, right? Which changes just kind of the very nature of everything. And then we see in Genesis 3, as God is pronouncing the curses, there's actually a little piece in there known as the proto-evangelion, which is like the first gospel. So Genesis 3:15, where God is talking to the serpent, who is Satan, and says, that the woman will that you will be an enmity with the woman's offspring. And you will bruise his heel, but he will crush your head. So there's this promise that God makes that he is going to be the one that conquers evil, and that there would be enmity between the woman's offspring, which is, I think, kind of two-part. Number one, singular, points forward to the new covenant. We might be jumping ahead a little bit, but to Jesus. But also more in general points to all of humanity, right? Like her offspring is literally humanity. And so there is now this enmity in the world, and then our problem is evil and sin and all of the effects of that. And God is making the promise right there that he is going to be the one through an offspring, but he is going to be the one that crushes evil, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
would that be like more in line with maybe like a prophecy more than a covenant?
Yeah,
or?
so there are, as you'll see as we walk through these, there's actually prophecy kind of interwoven in a lot of these covenants.
Okay.
So, for example, the Abrahamic covenant talks
Right.
about you being a blessing to all the nations. And it talks a lot about his seed. So, at any rate, so there's a lot of things intertwined. Usually, like a covenant is God making a promise that he will do or be something, and that there's a requirement from the people that he's entering into this covenant with.
Gotcha.
And so I think that some of the semantics on why people don't, or why some scholars don't believe that this Edenic is a covenant, more of just like a promise, like you're saying, is they're not seeing like necessarily the I am going to be this from the voice of God, and then this is your requirement, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay.
It would be more like kind of unstated, if that makes sense. The presence of God dwelling with his people, right? They are these representatives of his on the earth, that he's planting on the earth, and their job is to multiply this image of God all throughout creation. So he's like they're like his representatives, so to speak, on the earth. Now,
gotcha.
All of that isn't directly said, but it kind of like not implied, but like you see it in the story, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool. I was gonna ask. I should have probably said this before we got into the first covenant, but what makes a covenant a covenant? Like the structure of a covenant.
Yeah. So like, it's a promise from God that also bears with it a requirement from the people, or the person, or whoever it might be. And the nature of God's covenants is he is going to be faithful to his covenant regardless of if the people are faithful to their end of the covenant. That's not to say that there aren't like blessings and curses, because he does talk through blessings and curses if you follow these covenants versus if you don't. But ultimately the main point, or the spirit of the covenant, God is going to be faithful to regardless of the faithfulness of the humans that are involved.
moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
we have the Noahic covenant
Yep.
made with Noah.
Yep.
We know this because after the flood,
Mm-hmm.
Noah's family is the only family left, and God
Correct.
comes and makes a covenant with Noah. I'm blanking on what it is, but I'll let you take that.
Well, you probably remember the sign of the covenant, right?
Yeah, the rainbow.
The rainbow,
Yep.
right?
He said, he's like, God says to Noah's family, like, even though I know that people will still sin and be wicked, like,
Yep.
I will not flood the earth again.
Yep, exactly.
To destroy it.
Exactly. That's 100% right. So the main kind of thought and idea there then would be like preservation of life, right? Like he's not going to intercede and wipe humans off the face of the earth again, right? And he says he's not going to use flood waters specifically, but in that too, he's like saying, I'm sticking with this creation, even though they've rebelled, even though they, I think the words in Genesis is everyone only did evil all the time or something like that, which is maybe a little hyperbole for like emphasis, but that's not a good diagnosis, right? For the people. Everyone only did evil all the time. So he said, even though that's true, he's sticking with this creation and he's not going to destroy them. And then he says, I'll put my bow in the sky as a reminder to you of this covenant that I've made. I am sticking with you. I'm going to preserve life right here on this earth. And then what's interesting there, you mentioned that Noah and his family are the only ones alive. They get off the ark. God gave them the same mandate that he gave Adam and Eve back in Genesis 1:28. He says, be fruitful and multiply the earth.
Wow.
So I think this is something that I particularly love about these covenants is they progress, so to speak, or in my view, they progress. There are many scholars that would disagree with that, especially if they went to Dallas Theological Seminary. But there's a progression of these covenants that like you learn more about God, but that same nature of God like threads, like that same overall promise is going to thread through all of these and just be kind of built out and become a little bit richer, a little bit more specific, like whatever it might be.
Huh.
Yeah.
Do you think the Noahic covenant, I mean, even with Noah, God giving the same command to Noah and his family, be fruitful and multiply, it also has the elements of that proto-evangelion you had mentioned of the new Adam. Like Noah's family given the same command, be fruitful and multiply. It's like it's setting up, for even a new Adam in the future, but like Noah's to represent that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think, our created design was to be image bearers, to bear the image of God, which doesn't just mean our faces look like God's face, right? It means that like we are to spread his goodness. We are to spread like the flourishing of life that he created all throughout creation. And so like Adam was created to fulfill that and failed. And so now you're going to see as a part of these ongoing covenants, these kind of pseudo Adams as well, if that makes sense, that are going to be a part of this until, you're pointing to it, but we need to find like someone that actually does fulfill the created purpose of mankind, a second Adam, if you will.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think of the terminology for, I guess, modern day is the Easter eggs of the Messiah in each of these covenants.
Yep.
So, I'd say just based on the first two, and then it kind of seems like it's almost as if that God is keeping the same covenant from the beginning and just like because of our screw ups and because humanity rebels, he has to add to it every time. It's kind of how I don't that might be a wild statement, but like, you know, and we see just in this verse 2, Adam, you know, he makes the covenant. He tells him to be fruitful and multiply, and then there's the Edenic, is that what we said? The Eden or Adamic, whatever. That covenant with, you know, it will, you know, the offspring will crush your head. It's like he says, be fruitful and multiply, and then you have with Noah, he says, be fruitful and multiply. Also, I'm not going to kill everybody again. You know, so like he adds a second thing, and I don't know. I guess I don't know if that's like a theme or I don't know. It's just something that I noticed just talking about it just right now in this space just now. So
yeah.
How many times can I say now in the same sentence? Let's find out.
Probably a few more at least.
Yeah, you can fit a little bit more.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're onto something there. Yeah, the covenants don't happen in a vacuum. You know what I'm saying? It's not like God's like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to try something new now, right? Like they build on each other.
Because he's not wrong.
Good. Yeah, I didn't think about that way.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. So next is Abrahamic covenant.
Next is
the big one.
Abram. Yep.
I don't know if it's the big one, but
well, yeah.
Everybody references this one.
Yeah, people do know this one. Yeah. That's for sure. So, the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12. God goes and he finds this dude named Abraham in some place called Ur, and says, "Hey, leave the land that you're in and go to a land that I'll show you, and I'm going to make you into a great nation, and I'm going to make your offspring as numerous as the sky." And I am going to, like, through you, I'm going to bless the whole world. So that kind of is the crux of the promise. I'm going to make a nation or a people out of you. So there's a lot of things happening in the Abrahamic covenant. I think one of them, kind of continuing our progression, if you will, is he's going from one person that is to be fruitful and fill the earth to choosing one people through which to bless that earth, if that makes sense. Also inherent in this one, he talks a lot about Abraham's seed, which is going to be important as we get further along down the line. But basically, your seed is going to bless the world. And he talks a lot about Isaac, which is Abraham's son, but as in most of like God's kind of prophecies, like telling what he's going to do, it has what we would call a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment. There's another word for it is like telescoping, where you can see close and then far away. So Abraham is the first piece of that, Isaac, his son, is the first piece of that promise that your seed will be the one that kind of starts this whole thing, but it's also pointing forward to a like someone in his line, in his seed, if you will, will be like the blessing to the whole world, if that makes sense. Yeah. And the requirement is faith. So he's told Adam and he's told Noah, be fruitful and multiply the earth. He now tells Abraham, I will be the one that does this. I will make you as numerous as the stars in the sky. Your requirement is to trust me, right? Because the whole thing is trust. Go, leave where you are now and go to this place I'll show you. Doesn't tell him where.
Yeah.
There's the scene where he has this child of promise. He has Isaac, and then God tells him to sacrifice him. Abraham goes about that and does. Obviously, we know the story. God stops him. But what does God say about that? I know that you're faithful. Like, I know that you trust me. I know that you'll believe me. And so now, God's been asking this since the beginning, since Adam and Eve, right? Like, trust me. Don't eat from the tree.
Did he say, did he ask for faith from Noah? After saying, I'm not going to destroy people.
Yeah, he asked for faith because the dude was building a boat in the
middle
of nowhere.
Yeah. That's true.
For seemingly no reason.
When it hadn't rained yet.
Mocked. Well, he was mocked and ridiculed You know, like everybody was like, "You're an idiot. What are you doing?"
Yeah. Yep.
Because isn't it this might be a little bit off topic, but wasn't it like rain hadn't happened yet or something like that? Like it wasn't a normal occurrence, or I don't know, because I know in Genesis it says that the dew came from the earth.
Sure.
So I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
because like he said that it'll rain. Like how do they have a frame of reference if that wasn't? Anyway, sorry.
Sure.
That's a whole
yeah.
thing, but
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe not. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
As a whole.
But yeah, faith is his theme through all covenants.
Yep. And then he credited Abraham's faith to him as righteousness. Right? And righteousness is going to be in line with like our original created order, like following what God has created us to be, if that makes sense. And so that's your requirement there for the Abrahamic covenant is faith.
Yeah. And then the next one
is Mosaic covenant.
Mosaic, that's right.
The Mosaic covenant, yeah. So I think it's important too to recognize just some of the ups and downs of the story, right, leading up to some of these covenants. So we don't get a ton. We do get stuff between Noah and Abraham, but it's mainly a genealogy. But we get quite a bit between Abraham and Moses, and so we know that God fulfilled this promise, but he didn't do it in a way that we would anticipate, right? So Jacob, which is Abraham's grandson, has 12 children, and those children and all of their families, through a series of events, ends up going to Egypt, which is outside the land that God promised Abraham, and they end up becoming enslaved there. But during that enslavement, they grow to a people of, estimates of over 1 million. They're in Egypt. So this has become a large nation. There's more sand on the seashore than 1 million grains of sand. We know that.
Yeah.
But this is, right? This is growing. This is growing into a very, very large people. But they're being oppressed. And they're slaves, and they've got harsh taskmasters, and so the people cry out to God. And God raises up a person like he has, and this person's name is Moses. And you get the 12 plagues that are an affront to the Egyptian gods. And then they're
12?
finally... What's that? Or
12?
sorry, 10.
Okay, I was like, I thought there was 10. I was to make sure.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
2 extra ones we didn't know about.
Yeah. Let me tell you about the 2 extra ones, the extra biblical ones. Sorry, yep. And so they leave after the plagues, and they end up at the mountain of God, Sinai. And God meets with Moses, and he hands down this covenant with him, which is this, people like to say rules, which is fine. It's also known as the law. But really what it is it's like, how are we to conduct ourselves in the promised land? So this idea of how you've got this nation that God has chosen. He has set them apart. These are my people, right? Well, they are going to stand out in the world, right? They're not just going to blend into the world. They're going to stand out in the world because they need to be a blessing to the world. Right? If they don't stand out in the world, how is that going to be? And so the Mosaic covenant is handed down to them, and it is how they are to conduct themselves in the promised land so that they stand out in the world and they can be a blessing in the world. And so that, and this is what you hear over and over through Exodus, and much of the Old Testament, is so that they will know there is a God in Israel, right? Like, this is the reason for shows of strength. This is the reason for military conquest. This is the reason for all of this, so that the world will know that there's a God in Israel. And so this kind of code of conduct, if you will, is handed down to the people. Also, what comes with it is flourishing. Like, if they follow this law, they will flourish as a people. So you have the blessings and the curses that God gives as well. If you follow this, this will happen. If you don't, this will happen. So this law that he hands down is good, and it's for the people's flourishing and for them to stand like out amongst all of the rest of the nations of the world. And so like this was to set up like kind of a true theocracy, if you will. I will be your God, you will be my people. I will lead you. You have to have faith in me, right? So we're kind of building on this idea of faith, and I will be the one to lead you in in your lives, in the nation of Israel, which you get a glimpse of that through Exodus, through their journey through the wilderness. God leads them during the day in a pillar of fire, and at night, or a pillar of cloud and a fire at night. And so he's showing them, I am your God and you are my people, and this is how you are to conduct yourselves as my people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
And so I think some of the things that, like some of the language that you see in the New Testament, which, by the way, the New Testament harkens back to the Exodus. I mean, hundreds of times. Yeah. But you see that God tells them, you will be my treasured possession. You'll be my kingdom of priests. You will be a holy nation, right? Like this idea of being set apart. Like this language is just littered all throughout Exodus.
I like how we're able to kind of contextualize a lot of the events that happen in the Old Testament through that Mosaic covenant. You know, talking about military conquests, that shows of strength, like thinking into like Elijah and the prophets of Baal, like all of those things happened for the glory of for the glory of God, and to prove to everyone else that the God of Israel is the God.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
I think that's really cool because you can kind of contextualize everything else that happens through that lens.
Yep. Absolutely. Oh, and then obviously maybe not obviously, but a big part of this too is just Moses, the person of Moses, right? This is the mediator through which this covenant was handed down to Israel from. Moses was imperfect at best, and he failed, right? So you get this scene at the rock at Horeb or whatever, where he kind of arrogantly sets himself up as this person who's like flabbergasted that he has to bring water out of this rock, kind of glorifies himself, and God's like, no, that's not what I told you to do. Like, you have to trust me. So Moses also fails as this Adam type figure. And what does God say? He says, I will raise up a prophet like Moses for you. So again, you get more of this kind of prophetic, forward-facing, there is going to come someone, who's going to be able to fulfill this original mandate that I gave, this original purpose that I gave, the way back in Eden.
And he even started, into his role from a murder.
Yeah.
He murdered an Egyptian and had to flee.
Yep.
And because of that, that's when God spoke to him. So it's kind of, even he was even born, in a sense, like his ministry was almost born out of that, rebellious and sinful act.
Yeah, taking things into his own hands.
Yeah, which is exactly what we see the downfall again.
Yep.
Like you're just talking about with the rock, where he strikes it instead of speaking to it. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
It's almost like we as humans have patterns of sin and things that we fall into.
So weird.
What?
You might be onto something there.
Where'd you get that from?
I was thinking off the top of my head, man. The Holy Spirit gave it to me.
Speaking of sin, we have the Davidic covenant next.
Yes. Speaking of sin.
Speaking of sin.
David.
Yeah. You know how God talks to Satan in Job is like, have you considered my servant Job? I wonder if he ever said that about David.
Yeah. I don't know about that. Yeah. He did say David was a man after my own heart.
Right.
He said that very early on, 1 Samuel. But David was a mess.
He was pretty messed up.
A mess, yeah.
Adultery, murder, the whole 9 yards. Man.
Yes, just real bad. Real bad. Yeah.
And yet there's a covenant still made with him.
The Davidic covenant.
God is good.
Yep. So if we remember from the Mosaic covenant, we're supposed to have this theocracy, right? God is asking again through faith that people would do what he says for them to do. He created them. He knows how they should go about their lives so they can flourish, right? Trust me, trust me, trust me. And that's the idea of the theocracy. Well, the people don't like that. They don't want that. And so they ask for a king. And God gives them a king. First, he gives them the king they deserve, who's Saul, who's selfish and arrogant and
he's
flighty.
The people's king.
Yeah, he's the people's king. He's good looking. What did it say? He stood a whole shoulder's length or above or
he was
whatever.
tall of stature.
Yeah. And so he's a mess. And then God uses Samuel to anoint David, who God says, if you remember when Samuel's looking for this next king, he thinks that it's David's brothers, but God says, no. Man looks at outward appearance, but God looks at the heart, right? And that's when David is anointed, calls him a man after my own heart. So David's king, and then God makes a covenant with David. So David wants to create a house for God. So there's this palace that was built by the people from Lebanon, I think, for David, made of cedars and maybe Tyre or Sidon. Anyway, and he's like, how come I'm sitting in a palace but the ark of God is in a tent? I want to build a house. Calls Nathan the prophet, who says, okay, do what you want. But then God comes to Nathan and is like, no, tell David this. And so Nathan comes back to David and says, God tells you that you are not to build a house for him. He's going to build a house for you. And that house is actually a dynasty. And so he talks about how, again, your seed, right, is going to be an everlasting kingdom. And so you have this theocracy that's now a monarchy that God promises to use everlasting, and that there will be a king that sits on this throne. Again, another kind of telescoping prophecy, because he's talking about Solomon, who's David's son, will sit on the throne. And at that point, when Solomon is sitting on the throne, it's the most prosperous Israel would ever be, but also looking forward to a king that will lead an everlasting kingdom, which will actually, in turn, we find out, be a return to that theocracy, right? That you will trust me and follow me.
Yeah.
And so it's this idea of this everlasting kingdom that God has promised through. So if we're tracing the covenant here, we have got this idea that God is not going to give up on humanity, right? Then I'm going to select a people to be a blessing to all the world, right? This is how these people are to conduct themselves. And then this specifically is how they're going to be a blessing to all the world. This future king that is going to eventually open up the people of God to all tribes, all tongues, all nations. So it's kind of this. I know we're maybe jumping a little bit here again. It's hard.
It's okay.
Not to.
We're gonna get there.
It's hard
That's
not
the next
to
one.
when you're talking about these covenants, because they all tie together and culminate, which is just this beautiful thing. And so like the Davidic covenant really gives more specific build out to like who this person is going to be, right? Even back from the proto-evangelion, like who is going to be this person? Well, now we know they're going to be from the tribe of Judah, from the line of David. And so like we're getting more specific ideas of who this second Adam, who this prophet like Moses, who this person is going to be.
Yeah.
And we're there.
And we're there.
We're at the new covenant.
Yeah.
So that was a good overview of the Old Testament covenants and how they all build on one another, leading up to the new covenant, which is through Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior and King.
And how he fulfills all of the covenants.
Yes.
Exactly.
I think it's cool because the Old Testament is such a big chunk of our Bible. There's so much history and it can feel at times that there's not a way to apply a lot of the stuff that we see there.
Sure.
Which obviously isn't true. But like it can feel that way because we're sinful, broken human beings. And so, it's nice. It's nice to contextualize from the beginning of time, from the first sin, that God keeps his promises.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
all the way back when Eve and Adam and Eve, ate of the fruit, and God makes that covenant that her offspring will crush your head to the
Yep.
serpent.
Yep.
And we see him make this basically the same promise in like bare bones, but
Right.
but like
Right.
he, for different people, of like, I'm going to continue your seed, and there will be a great nation, and he will bless, and like all of those things that are all coming together, and then the culmination of them, which is the new covenant.
Sorry.
Sorry, I thought you were tracking with me.
I wasn't following with you.
It's all good.
Yes. So we have the new covenant, or the good news of the gospel that we have in Jesus. I have here just Acts 13, 32 through 33. I just wanted to read that really quick before we jump into the overview of the new covenant.
Absolutely.
But Acts 13:32 says, "And now we are here to bring you this good news. The promise was made to our ancestors, and God has now fulfilled it for us, their descendants, by raising Jesus. This is what the second psalm says about Jesus. You are my son, and today I have become your father." I don't know. I picked that verse because it was something at the time I just knew it was related to. Here we are. We have now this new covenant with God through Jesus Christ, through God raising him from the dead, but even more so the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, like his ministry, everything. All of the Old Testament covenants culminating into one person of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about the new covenant, I think.
Yes.
I think a couple of things that just really, at least kind of pop for me when I think through it is, first of all, and you said it, like Jesus is the fulfillment of all of those failed Adams, right? Of Adam, of Noah, of Abraham, of Moses, of David, right? Like Jesus is all of those things. He's the king, he's the priest, he's the prophet. He's all of those things, right? But also, not only that, Jesus did not do things as people would have expected, just like all of those covenants were carried out not as people would have expected.
Yeah.
Right? So, like we said, the nation of Israel is built not even in their promised land, but it's actually built in Egypt. And then you have them leave oppression, get this rule, they're getting ready to go into the promised land, and then they're sent on a 40-year exodus, right? So they don't even step into it then. And then they have a very short-lived time in the promised land before they're taken into exile because of their unfaithfulness, right? So like nothing happens as you would anticipate it happening, right? And then Jesus comes on the scene, and he's born in a small town. He is humble, and then he like flips everything upside down. He's saying things like, you will only find your life when you lose it, right? And the exalted will be humbled, and the humbled will be exalted. And he's eating with sinners and tax collectors, and he's not following any of the religious or cultural like kind of rules, so to speak, of like who you associate with and status and all of these things. And then you've got this people who are assuming, and we probably would have assumed the same thing had we been them, is like this Messiah is going to restore us, going to restore Israel, and we're going to be this nation, this powerful nation here that blesses the whole world, right? And so they're looking for kind of this earthly like political leader, so to speak, king, warrior, like all of this. But Jesus accomplishes all of this by going to his death. So like everything is just not how
upside down.
Yeah, completely upside down, and not how you have written it. Just like the way all of God's covenants had been fulfilled up until that point too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's just this beautiful kind of culmination of this story that reaches its climax in the death and resurrection of this king who fulfilled all of these things, and is like, he's supposed to be held in the highest honor, and he dies in the most shameful way possible. So it's this, just this beautiful picture of God's promises, the way he works, and his faithfulness and his love for us. Like all of it just culminates in this person of Jesus.
It's a beautiful thing that Jesus, not only did he make a covenant with Jews, but he also made a covenant with Gentiles,
right?
Like people who were not of Israel's descended people, like that the gospel, like that eternal life was for everyone, who would believe. That's a beautiful thing.
The culmination of that promise in the covenant with Abraham about you will be a blessing to all nations through your people will be a blessing to all nations, and Jesus is that singular person that this came to fruition through. And I love too what you were saying, Jeremiah, because the requirement of all the covenants, including the new covenant, at its very base is the exact same thing: faith.
Yeah,
that's it, right? Like Noah had to have faith, right? And this is kind of the idea of Hebrews, right? Through faith. You got this hall of fame of faith. They're pointing out that this is what pleases God, that we believe that he is God and we're not. And it's so simple, but so profound as well.
Yeah.
And so even though like the specific terms of those covenants are a little bit different, the entryway into all of them is faith. Because like even when we think of the Mosaic covenant, we don't necessarily first think of faith, right? We think of rules, things we have to do. Things like, we think of the laws to show us how far short we have fallen from God, which that is a piece of the law, no doubt about it. But the entryway into that is faith. You have to believe if someone can tell me how to conduct myself in a certain area, I have to believe that they're an expert in that, right?
Yeah.
Like and so like you have to have faith that God is God.
Right. Well, and have faith, like through the Mosaic law, like have faith that those rules are there to protect you and not to like oppress you.
Exactly.
Because they had just come out of Egypt,
right?
Where every rule they had to follow was oppression. And
exactly.
It was
absolutely.
And so the fact that we're getting a new set of rules, but it was for your freedom and for your flourishing. Yeah, exactly. Instead of your oppression and your pain.
Yep. Exactly.
And
That's
kind of like using the same sort of like framework, but in a holy and perfect way that only God can use it.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's almost like we have a God that loves us.
What?
I know.
And like
has
he
loved
never
us.
says that though, except for like all the time.
I know. And like has loved us the whole time.
What?
I know.
And it's almost like he's always wanted us to just be his children and to be and trust him and be with him or something.
To trust him, yeah. It's so
weird.
I know.
Crazy, man.
What a patient God that we have.
What a novel concept.
Well, what's the first word that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 13 to describe love?
Don't tell me.
Love is patient.
Patient.
Oh, yeah.
Patient.
Look it up.
Right?
I know that.
Yeah. So I think God would agree that he is patient.
Yeah.
Because he is love, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we see that with a bunch of different stories in the Bible too. Like with Nineveh. He was patient with them. He had Jonah go to him. Jonah, they repented for a while, but then they went back to their ways, and so he still had patience with them for the time being where they were repentant. And then when they turned back, he was like, okay, you guys are done.
Yep.
But like second chances is his whole thing throughout the entire Bible.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like he didn't literally kill Adam and Eve right after they had they still surely died. They did die.
Yep.
And that death is more of a spiritual death that he was talking about in that moment. But like he still gave people a second chance to follow him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like
Yep.
that's exactly
Very
what Jesus
patient.
does for everyone.
Yep.
And it's just the new covenant. I feel like covers all of the bases of the
Mm-hmm.
the old covenants and the covenants we see throughout the Old Testament.
Yep.
Is he's like, this is all of those but better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
And
yeah.
it's not. And I love that. You know, because Jesus does say that, you know, salvation was first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles.
Yep.
But from the beginning, for one, he chose for all intents and purposes, a Gentile,
Mhm.
Abram,
Right.
but he was of the descent that God had chosen before that. But, you know, like from the beginning, it was to redeem the whole world.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the Israelites or
Right.
just the Jews. It was the
Right.
entire world because his heart was for everyone.
Yep.
And I feel like it's
Absolutely.
also easy to lose that perspective during the Old Testament because it seems like he's only favoring the Jews. I mean, we have stories about like Ruth the Moabite, and you know, there's a bunch of different other
Oh, sure.
Gentiles
Yep.
who get
Right.
grafted into the family. And
Right.
that's very beautiful, but it
Yep.
shows God's heart of I love everyone and I want
Yeah.
everyone to be my child. And I just think I don't know. I feel like we can lose that while looking at the Old Testament sometimes.
Oh yeah,
too.
absolutely. Yep. Totally.
I guess the last, portion of this episode we wanted to do was just like how to discern present day promises
That's
or
good. Yeah.
covenants that God has made to us now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How would you perceive that? Kind of opened it.
It kind of
It's
seems
broad.
That's a good question.
So
a
we can
loaded-
narrow it down.
like a loaded
though,
question.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's an important conversation because I think we sometimes think God promises things he doesn't and hasn't. And I think we also forget the promises he has made. You know, so I think this is an important conversation. Ultimately, like we know that all of God's promises have found their culmination. I think 2 Corinthians says that all of God's promises find their yes in Jesus, right? So all of the promises that God has made to us and made to his people have found their yes, so to speak, in Jesus Christ. And so everything that we're promised is going to be through that filter, if that makes sense. So like you may feel like God told you something or, you know, promised you something, specific. Like Jeremiah, you may feel like God has promised that you are going to get the job of your dreams in 10 years. You know what I'm saying? Or, something like that. We can't really bank on that from a promise or covenant standpoint. But there are things that we can bank on from a promise and a covenant standpoint that are probably better than anything we can dream up for ourselves. That makes sense. So Romans 8:28, we know that God works for the good in all things.
Right.
In all things, God works for the good of those who love him or are called according to his purpose.
Right.
And so, like, that is a promise. Maybe you could even say a covenant, I suppose, with the same idea of faith, like believing him, right? That no matter the circumstances that we have, we're in, up, down, sideways, upside down, whatever, like God is going to work for our good, which in turn is also for his glory, right? Because we want all to know that there is a God in Israel, right? There is a God of the earth. There is a creator God who loves you, who wants your flourishing, who wants you to believe that he is God, right? And so I think there are promises like that, that we can hang on to, as we look forward. There are promises that he is going to consummate and culminate all of this. We're in between, like you probably have heard the already, but the not yet, right? Like everything has been secured, but it has not yet been consummated. So I like the idea of, in boxing, there's a moment where the loser of the match has hit the canvas, but the bell has not rung yet, right? Like there's still the 10 count, or the referee has to call the fight over, right? Like we're in that moment, like our enemy is defeated and we're waiting for that final bell.
Right.
If that makes sense.
That's a really good analogy. I don't think I've heard that before. That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if boxing's appropriate.
You're a huge boxing fan, aren't you?
Not huge, but I do follow Bud Crawford.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, he's from Omaha.
Yeah.
He actually went to my high school. Oh. I'm a little bit older than him, so I think he went with my brother. But anyway, yeah, I know a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
A little bit, not much.
But that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus kind of uppercutted Satan, so.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. And so we do have the promises of consummation, where you have the thing from Isaiah where he will wipe every tear from your eyes and there will be no more death, and you have that repeated in Revelation, and so we have that to look forward to, right? Like this kind of perfect union and harmony with Christ, with the Godhead, in a new world, essentially, a new Jerusalem, a new heavens, a new earth.
Yeah.
So that is a covenant and a promise that we have to look forward to, is the consummation of the new covenant.
I was also gonna say too, if we going back to what you're saying, Romans 8:28, he works all things for the good of those who love him. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you think back, I bet Abraham wasn't thinking wasn't thinking about God's promise when he went and he had a son with, what's her name, Hagar?
Isaac. Oh yeah, Hagar. Yep.
Yeah,
Ishmael.
like that. Like there's times like that, or like I bet when Jacob was working 14 years to marry Rachel, even though he ended up marrying the wrong girl, that he wasn't thinking about God's promise. He was just trying to get the work done.
Yep.
Like David wasn't thinking about God's promise when he was out just slaying lions with a slingshot.
Right.
Like I feel like it's easy for us to look at just like the hallmark moments in the Bible of like, these are the only moments in their lives, but no, they lived normal human lives. They lived a moment to moment. It wasn't like they skipped forward in time,
Right.
Like they have to go through those menial tasks. Like David was probably covered in sheep poop for a really long time before he even was, promised the crown. And so it's like we get into our heads that from what I see, like we get into our heads that, if God makes a promise, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like it's got to be around the corner,
Yep.
It's kind of like when we went through Joseph, the story of Joseph.
Yeah.
And it was like
pit stops on Providence or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like where he was in the prison and he's like, hey, when you go to the king, remember me or whatever. And then years go by and nothing happens for him. You know, it's like we have more often than not, that's going to be where we are.
You're right.
Because those are the longer periods of time. Times where they like those, like promises that God makes, like those times that they come to fruition are usually smaller moments in our lives,
Yep.
And so having that mindset of like everything is being worked for my good through the glory of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
Is that you have to live that moment to moment.
Yep.
It's not like milestone to milestone, You have to have the like day to day mindset about it.
Mindset of you have a God who
every
loves
day.
you.
Yeah,
and
every day.
You love him.
Exactly.
Yep, absolutely.
And it doesn't change, It's every moment that's the same, and that's the best promise that we can have is a God that loves us. If we love, well, not if, he always loves us, but like, and just asks us to love him in return.
Our experience of that love changes a lot depending on us, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
Relationships go two ways.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're onto something there. Like, we get impatient, right? Like, you mentioned, like, God is very patient, and what a marker of us is we're very impatient. And we like to think that we have control over when the end times are, or we can predict it, or you know what I'm saying,
like with the eclipse and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you guys probably won't release this for a while, but today's April 8th, and there was a partial solar eclipse here, at least, and many YouTubers were saying that this is the rapture, and there's something about a red heifer, and oh my goodness. Right. Well, I mean, as of right now, it's 7:30 p.m. We have not been raptured that I know of.
Either that or we're not true believers.
Or that, right. Then we've got some things to work out. I don't know. But I just always I think 2 Peter, he says, God is not slow as we count slowness, essentially. Like he's not slow to fulfill his promises. He's not. He's faithful. And we may put him on our time clock and count him slow, but he is not slow. In
the words of Gandalf, a wizard is never late. He arrives precisely when he means to.
I love that line. Yep, exactly.
That's. I know it's kind of like a cliche, but it's like that's exactly how God works. He has the best timing, and because we're tiny little humans, on the face of the earth, he can see everything. We're like, what is going on? It's like if you look at an ant and it's walking around and it's trying to find its place again. It's like you can see where it's gonna be, and he's gonna, in 10 more feet he'll be there, but he doesn't know that.
Right?
It's the same thing for us. God's looking at us, and he's like, I see where you're going. Just keep going. This is where I want you.
Yeah.
It's 10 feet. It's 10 miles down the line, but you're gonna get there.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that's good.
I think it's also a good thing to point out too is like our ultimate promise given to us through Jesus isn't on this side of eternity.
Correct. Yep.
The ultimate promise is that we will be in heaven, in paradise with him and the Father. And because I know there's a lot of people who will continue to feel suffering and continue to feel pain for their entire lives. There are people that aren't going to see that relief, or there may not be someone physically to wipe their tears on this side of eternity, but through our hope in Jesus and through the covenant that he's made with us, we have that hope for eternity. And I think that's the main thing to remember is there's still going to be times where we get thrown into prison in Joseph's case. Like there's going to be times where we're stuck working an awful job in Jacob's case, There's going to be time where we prop ourselves up and we think we're all that, like Moses. And, there's going to be times like that, but the ultimate promise and the ultimate covenant and the ultimate payoff is to be in forever with Jesus.
Yep. Absolutely. Well said. Yep. And in light of that too, like, I think it's important to have an eternal perspective for everything just like that. But also remember that we do have a God that walked this earth in real feet, in a real body, that walked it as we were created to walk it. And I think sometimes we don't look at Jesus as the model for humanity. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
So there is he said, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. And that is eschatological, meaning it is future oriented, but there's also an aspect of that is here. And so I would just encourage people to have kind of a dual view of this. Like, yes, things will never be unstained until that day that it's consummated. So sin is always going to be
a plague.
Yeah, at play, right? And so, however, that being said, we also do have a model for living on this earth that is for our abundance and for our flourishing. And so what I wouldn't want people to do is have a end times only view, meaning like, I'm just waiting this thing out, which I think we can get into.
Yeah.
I also wouldn't want them to have a prosperity view of like, I can have it all right here and right now, and if I have enough faith, my depression will go away, all that, right? Like those, I think those are both skewed and wrong ways to view the promises of God and how we're to live our lives here. We are followers of Jesus. And so that means we're modeling and practicing our lives the way that he did. And the way that he modeled and practiced his life will actually give us a more fulfilling life here. It will. Does that mean we will live problem-free? No. Does that mean we'll be up and to the right? No. Does that mean we won't deal with sin and its consequences and physical and mental and emotional health? No, of course not. But that is the way to live here and will be a witness to the world, because we are now his representatives, his ambassadors here on earth, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't know. Do you have anything else we need?
Really well said. That's a good conclusive thing right there. Yeah. I don't have anything else to add.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, Joe, for just taking the time and just to sit and talk with us. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you back on maybe one day about a different topic or something
Sounds
like that.
good.
Yeah,
another
awesome.
dense one.
Absolutely.
Nice. Love it.
Take a bite of the dense muffin.
Take a bite of the dense muffin. That needs to be a shirt.
It does need to be a shirt.
We
need to get more Patreon followers so we can make merch. Sorry, I'm talking to them.
Yeah,
you're putting a plug.
Yeah.
All right.
So
smash that subscribe button.
Yes, hit the like button.
Follow us on Spotify.
Hit the share. I don't know.
And Apple Podcasts. That's where we're at.
So.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this has been the Dense Muffin. If you like our, like we said, if you like our content, you can follow us on Instagram.
Support us on Patreon. We have a Bible fund where people can reach out, and if they need a Bible, we will buy them a Bible. So if you want to contribute to that, go to our Patreon.
Yep.
So.
And then follow us on, like I said, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think the bell is still a thing, and hit that bell.
Hit that bell.
When we have new episodes coming out. But yeah, I'm Thaddeus.
And I'm Jeremiah.
And we'll see you in the next one.
Adios.
Amen.